Hello, I'm Marcus Cage from the brand new show Hebrew Apologetics. I guess first and foremost, I should probably tell a little bit of background on my journey and what's gotten me to believe in the things I believe now, which are different from which I used to believe. And so, first, I'll tell you that I grew up in a very religious family, grew up mostly in Baptist churches, um, but also in AME Zion churches. For those not familiar, that's African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. I've also spent time going to Catholic Mass, and I've spent a little bit of time studying the Quran and Buddhism and all kind of other different spiritual faiths. But the Bible was always my cornerstone. And so even as a child, kind of reciting the Bible and going to church, it seemed like nonstop, at least until I was in my teens. Um I remembered a lot of the Bible, but I didn't understand the Bible. And it was more like just reflexive reciting things, especially when I heard people who was coming with a different perspective. And so for many years, I kind of left kind of religious debates and arguments for people who I felt were a lot more astute and knew what they were talking about on the issues. That being mostly pastors and religious scholars, which you see on TV, these multimillionaire preachers, people writing all these books, all that stuff like that. Well, when I simply started to just read on my own and being a student of history also for most of my life, I've never really put the two things together and examined them. And once I started doing that, things started making sense, which didn't make sense before. Also, to add into that, there was always this debate about the Apocrypha. I'd always heard about it, but I was always told by most pastors that it's not biblical, stay away from it, it's heretical. Um, it's a false doctrine, basically. Just stay away from the stuff that's in there. And I was like, I never knew why, so I just left it alone. And so a lot of questions I had, and I asked many people within the religious community, and I just never got answers that really made sense to me. And so I decided I'm not going to fight with them, and I was raised in that kind of church where it's about the civility more and loving thy brother. And I feel like a lot of times righteous rebukes, which you're allowed to do per the Bible, are not done. And so stretches of the truth and adding to scripture and misinterpretations start going a little off the rails. And also not focusing on very, very small details. And I was always kind of basically told, I guess I'll give you like the basic breakdown. I feel like most Christians do. You get the creation story, you get kicked out of Garden of Eden, of course, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. You get, I guess, of course, the story of Egypt and them coming out and establishing Israel after a couple of little battles here and there. And then you hear about, Israel the man, and then it skips a little bit. And then you start hearing about, Jonah and the whale and Daniel and King Solomon and David and all this stuff like that. And then it skips ahead and, okay, now Jesus is born. And, they're killing all the newborn babies. And now Jesus died on the cross. We all love each other. We're all going to be saved as long as you believe in God. And that's it. Kumbaya. And for those who don't know, Kumbaya means come by Lord. Um, so when you get that kind of little spill, it always just felt like something was missing here. Like, why would you have such a big book with so much information and say everything is important, but we don't even really talk about most of the stuff that's in there? And when I started getting questions on certain things, I realized there were certain books which I didn't even know were in the Bible. And I'm talking about just the 66 books which most Christians use or only accept. Not even talking about the 14 books in the Apocrypha. But back to the Apocrypha, once I actually started to read it, what I realized more than anything in the Apocrypha is it is heavy, heavy, heavy with actual history that you can line up with real world. You have the Roman Caesars that we all know about, talking about Julius Caesar, talking about Tiberius, even going into Nero. All of these people are all tied in, and you can see them through Bible history. Even you can even see Hannibal, which we all hear about, the great African general. We can even hear about that in the Bible. All of that's in there. But what I didn't realize is parts of the Bible are intentionally written in similitudes, allegories, and dark words or dark sayings. And so some of it is meant to be a little confusing. Some of it that might be a prophecy might be prophesizing one thing, or it might be prophesizing multiple things. That's something that I didn't understand either. Because when you'll see that a sack is supposed to happen or destruction is supposed to happen to a certain place, and you know of it happening famously at a certain time, and you're like, well, but all the stuff that it says here in the Bible, all that didn't happen at that time. Well, then you might look a little bit later, maybe 100 years in history, and then all of these other events happen that line up with more of the things which didn't happen. And then you'll see a little bit later something else that'll happen that will fulfill all of those things. And so if you're not looking for those kind of things and you're not following all of your actual precepts, and in the church, in the Christian church, I didn't even know what a precept was. And what a precept is basically a precept is a law. And so when you go into going from precept to precept in some Bibles, you'll see this little part on the side where it'll give you a different book and chapter to go to. When you go to those, a lot of times it'll say some of the similar things that it was saying before, but it might be clarifying it or giving you a certain new name to add to what you were reading before. And so now when you read this whole passage again, you see it a little bit differently because there's a lot of details that you might not have known entirely. And there's also big details which in the Christian church, you just don't even focus on. And so if you take out the Apocrypha and you take out not paying attention to the Old Testament because supposedly we're all in the New Testament, the New Covenant, then you're only really even looking at like 20% of the book. And in the Bible, he says, I come in the volume of the book. So if he comes in the volume of the book and you're ignoring 80% of it, you're missing a lot of details. And I always use the analogy. It's like there's a trilogy of movies and you skip the first two and only watch the third one and then tell everybody about that you're an expert on the whole trilogy. And I realized that some of the things that I was hearing some of the Hebrew Israelites say that I disagreed with, that I didn't understand, I decided to go back and try to reread and try to research and learn, so I could even refute a lot of the points because I just didn't agree with it and didn't make sense. And I learned to stop trying to make it say what you want it to say and just pay attention to what it's saying. You have no control over it. If you believe, you have no control over what happens or who you are or who you're not, or, whatever your history and past was to get you to this point. You have no power over any of that. So all you can do is just either accept the information or not accept the information. So for me, it was pretty clear when I see a bunch of things line up a certain way, and then I look for more research to back it up in a secondary source, a secular source, via history, archaeology, books from what do they call it? I can't remember what it's called. It's like extra biblical sourcing, where it's not the Bible, but it's commentary on the Bible. It is people who were contemporaries at the time, or only a few, decades later, or maybe 40, 50 years later after a certain prophet or a certain time period within the Bible. So for me, if I take the Bible as, for the most part, the overall message, I take that for 100%. Of course, there is translation issues, which I have, and especially once you go back into whether it's the Septuagint or trying to remember what the other one is called. Is it Aramaic? I believe it's Aramaic. But when you go into those different ones, or even if it's some differentiation into the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's some arguments and there's some disagreements there. And then, of course, you have to understand some of the political things and stuff that was going on with kings and stuff during that time period. So I feel like in the Christian church, I think that the faith part is focused on very heavily. And I don't want you to get me wrong. Faith is extremely important. But if you want to understand what's going on and you want to try to, wait for the return of the Messiah and try to anticipate it and try to do his will by reaching out to others who, of course, want the message. It's not for everybody if they don't want to hear it. But for those who want to hear the message and say they are believers in the word, then from what I understand, you're basically obligated to give them the word. Later on, once you get more astute in the word, which I don't feel I'm to that level, you're actually supposed to go out and rebuke others. So if you're at the point when you are living completely sinless and walking with God, at that point, you are supposed to righteously judge and rebuke. Righteously, though, not just decide to yell at people and curse people out for whatever reasons, whether you're correct or not. Especially when most people don't, maybe they aren't as learned or studied as you are on the subject. So as I've tried to understand this information, I've always wanted to take the approach to try to be, I guess, as diplomatic as I can, because as I start reading some of these things, I start seeing contradictions with things I'm seeing today in society. And I'll leave it at that until we get deeper into the show. But this is my first one that I'm going to do, and I'm going to do a couple more just so you guys can understand my journey to getting here, and even deciding to do this channel in the first place. So hopefully you guys tune in with us when we start doing our live streams, and hopefully you guys catch my videos and Jerome's videos. He plans to be breaking down Torah law and trying to explain it for people who want to understand it. And I'm still learning myself, so I listen to multiple people and multiple different teachers, and hopefully, Most High willing, I'll be able to have some of them join us, and they can explain some things and answer some questions for you. Some of you out there, which I'm not able to answer, or things which you have, which disagreements where I just feel like other scriptures are not backing up maybe a scripture that you might have. I'll try to bring other people on, and if you guys want to have a debate about it, that'll be fun also, whether I'm in the debate or moderating. It's all good here. So hopefully you guys tune in. Make sure you subscribe and tap the bell. Have a good one. All praise to the Most High.